Hey, what's up? This is Nick with Ultimate Motorcycling, and today I'm out here at Cartagena Racetrack. You guys may be familiar with this. BSB tests here, World Superbike has tested here, and just a ton of riding has gone on at this legendary circuit. Now, what I'm doing here today is riding this beauty, the 2020 Triumph Street Triple 765 RS. Now, for 2020, this is a year of refinement for the 765cc motor, as well as this bike overall. Triumph really learned a lot from their time in the MotoGP Championship, as they're now the spec engine producer for Moto 2. And with Euro 5 emissions standards looming, they went ahead and not only met those standards, but improved the RS package. Now, first, a little bit of history. If we look at the current 765 lineup, you have the S, the R, and the RS. And what Triumph learned from various conversations with customers and stuff like that is that they really loved the mid-range power that the R model made. Because if we remember, the S, the R, and the RS actually had different states of tune for each model. They also had slightly different geometry as well. Well, Triumph went ahead, looked at Euro 5, and solved the problem by giving this bike plus 9% more mid-range power. Now, you're still getting relatively the same 120, 121 horsepower and roughly 58 foot-pounds of torque. Those numbers haven't changed, but what is changing is riding that mid-range, right in that zone of where you're actually going to be riding on the street, you know, between 6,000 RPM and say 8, 9, 10-ish on a good one. You're going to have additional mid-range power. And we actually reviewed the R model just a few months back. So while I can't do a direct comparison, that engine is fresh in my mind, and I can honestly say that this bike has a lot more punch in the saddle right where you need it. So of course, the inline-3 motor is just such a beauty. It sounds absolutely amazing. You get on the gas, but overall, you get more punch right in the midsection of the motor. And again, if you're a street rider, you're having some fun in the canyons, that's exactly where you need it. And it's where the RS was lacking a little bit of power. So now it's a bit more refined. It's definitely a positive evolution in that sense. And that's the motor. But how did they actually achieve that? They did it in a couple clever ways. Now, with emission standards looming, they went ahead and modified the exhaust cam. They also went ahead and modified the air intake to optimize that as well. Now, coupled with that, they redesigned the headers for more airflow as well as the exhaust muffler. So to deal with more stringent emission standards, they had to add additional componentry into the muffler. Now, normally you'd say, oh, well, if it has greater catalytic components, it's gonna choke it up. That's not the case here. Triumph expertly and wisely and masterfully were able to not only open up the exhaust to help encourage that new state of tune that we mentioned earlier to get more mid-range, but in comparison to the previous generation that came out just in 2017, this is actually more free-flowing exhaust. Now, another cool little fact about the exhaust, it has a crossover pipe that goes from header to header. What that does is help optimize the gas exchange between pipes at different RPMs and allows that tune to be even tighter. Now, if we want to talk about just experiencing that bike, you get on the gas in this thing, the throttle connection is very good in each mode. Of course, each mode is going to dramatically change the behavior of the bike, but when you get on the gas, you know, even as low as maybe 2,800 RPM, it starts building, then that mid-power punch really comes in, and it just carries all the way through to redline. In the street, that's really important, because you just get on the gas out of the canyons, you can just blast out of those corners and have a lot of fun. But even better, out on Cartagena's tight, very tight technical track, you're able to just twist the grip, exit those corners nice and strong, and you get a lot more for your money at that point. This bike does have a full suite of electronics, and unlike the Speed Triple, it lacks an IMU supported package. Now, that's not to say that this one is bad. In fact, it's extremely impressive. Triumph wouldn't really tell us how they're doing it, because without an IMU, you kind of assume that it's just basic wheel speed sensors. That's not the case here. Wheel speed sensors are a factor, but of course it's also factoring in throttle position and a couple other things that they're being a bit cagey about. It is more advanced than your just rudimentary wheel speed sensor system, and they've done a really good job in that aspect. Now, we're going to talk about rider modes. You have 5 different rider modes. You have rain, road, sport, and track, and then a customizable rider mode. You can adjust the different levels of intervention in those. If you go to rain, which actually cuts the horsepower to roughly 100 horsepower, you go to sport, those intervention levels are going to be completely different. It also changes the characteristics of the throttle. From rain to sport, there's a vast difference. Rain is pretty soft, and it builds from there, and it becomes much more snappy. The one thing that you cannot do because of Euro 5 is disable the ABS. On the street, having traction control and having ABS is a massive plus. On track, the one complaint that we were having a little bit is that the ABS could sometimes trigger when you're really barreling into a corner, and that can get a bit spooky. Now, that's not a criticism of Triumph, their engineers, or their strategies for traction control and ABS at all. In fact, that's a direct byproduct of Euro 5. But overall, I think the electronics package on this is extremely competitive, even when we think about the fact that it's not using an IMU. Now, moving on to the Tft display, this is the same Tft display that was on the 17 and Plus. However, they've updated it with a lot more variations in terms of appearance. You have several different things to choose from, and overall, it's the TFT2, as they say. Now, there's a couple other really cool things that you can do. You can get a Bluetooth edition. You can also get the GoPro edition that was featured on the Scrambler 1200 XC and XE. So you have, from the controls, you can pair your GoPro to the bike and then operate it from there. Now, as far as going back to a couple engineering points, not only do we have a quick shifter and an auto blipper, which was not featured on the previous gen, which only had a quick shifter, they've increased the performance of just general shifting. What they did is they got rid of the backlash gears. And what they've done is they've tightened the tolerances. And so everything that's connected to the crank, they've reduced internal inertia by 7%. Which allows the motor to spin even more freely, which Triumph claims helps spin the motor up more freely, and you're able to feel that in the throttle. This motor, just as it was in 17, is extremely smooth now. The quick shifter itself is a really sorted piece of kit. The quick shift up, whether you're at low speed or high speed, you know, half gas, quarter gas, wide open throttle, it works very well. The auto blipper is, in my opinion, working in the same capacity. It works extremely well, regardless of your pace. So if you're just putting along in traffic and you're just too lazy to use the clutch, go ahead and rely on that thing, and it's going to sort you out. If we talk about the chassis, it's still the same chassis that's confidence inspiring. It's quite agile. You do not necessarily have to put in some work into the bars or, you know, body positioning, that sort of thing, but you get a lot of confidence in the front end. It's not a flighty bike at all. You point it in the direction you want to go, and it's going to be going there. Of course, because the chassis hasn't changed, we're still seeing that fully adjustable show fork, and in the rear, a fully adjustable Öhlins shock. In the street setting, soaks up everything pretty well, and it's not going to put a lot of negative feedback into the rider. When you're really getting some good pace in the canyons, it's going to keep the bike nice and compliant, but also very stable, and that's extremely important. On the track, it's much of the same story. Of course, we turned everything up a bit, added some damping, added some preload, because we're keeping some higher paces on the track, but overall, the chassis is just as I remember it, and just as good, and that's something that I'm really impressed with. The last thing I want to touch on, of course, is the Brembo M50 Calipers. It's great. We also have a Brembo MCS lever that has some really interesting features, and that's a returning component as well. It's an adjustable ratio lever. You can actually adjust the feel of the lever. And to do that normally, you just have to completely replace the master cylinder. But in this case, you have an adjustable lever, adjustable ratios. You can change the way brakes feel to fit you as a rider and an owner, and that's really cool. Triumph's goal going forward is to really focus on fit and finish. And in my opinion, that's what they've been doing for the past 5 years, is providing bikes to customers that truly make you feel special when you spend that money. When you put down this cash, on this bike, you go home thinking, wow, they've put a lot of attention to the details. For example, on the triple clamp right here, there's a Triumph logo that's embossed into it, but they also updated the styling, gave it a more aggressive look. The most obvious change is going to be the headlight. It has daytime running lights. It still maintains that Johnny 5 from the 1980s classic short circuit look, bit of a, you know, perturbed robot appearance. And overall, I think it's a really cool look. You know, it's a sporty, aggressive, predatory little bike. And that's the personality that Triumph wants to project. Now, all the plastics have actually been updated and really refined in subtle ways. And overall, it's to maintain that aggressive posture. Now, the last thing I want to touch on in regards to aesthetics is that they have a nice little carbon bit here now that you didn't get before. So again, Triumph has done an extremely good job in the fit and finish department, and I think they're one of the leaders in the motorcycle market at the moment. Now, those are strong words, but if you see these bikes in person, you'll understand what I'm talking about. The 2020 Street Triple 765 RS is just what I fell in love with in Catalonia, and it's just as good and even better. And guess what? The price is exactly the same. So you're looking at $12,550 in the United States. You're going to be able to get it at the end of November, early December at your dealers. So you know what? Go ahead, test ride one of these things, and I think you're going to have a good time. So this is Nick with Ultimate Motorcycling, reminding you guys to go ahead and be safe out there. And I'm going to get out of here. Take care.